Boker Tov, Shavua Tov, and Chodesh Tov. This is Pei Tes. We'll start with the Mishnah on Pei Ches Amud Beis. And the Pasuk says, V'im Beis Isha Nadara. So she took the neder while she was married. And if she enters into the marriage with Nedarim, then he cannot be made for those Nedarim. And then the Torah says, V'neder Almana Ugrusha is Yakum Aleh, which, if interpreted literally, means that if she doesn't have a husband, then no one could be made for her Nedarim. Ketzad. So the Mishnah asks, what is the Torah adding here? Who would possibly be made for her Nedarim if she's an Almana or a Grusha? And the Mishnah answers, Amra, if this Almana or Grusha declared Hareini Nazir liachar shloshim yom, the Naziris will be chal in another 30 days. Afal pisha niseis b'toch shloshim yom. So we're talking about a case where she was married to Reuven. She was divorced or widowed from Reuven, and she married Shimon. But between the time of the neder that she took and the 30 days when the neder would be chal, in that middle period, she married Shimon. And you might think that since Shimon's marriage predated the chalos neder, because he married her within that 30-day period before the neder would be chal, the nazirus would be chal, therefore he could be made for enu yochel lahafer. He cannot be made for. Why? Because when did she take the neder? That's the critical moment that determines whether he, the Baal, could be made for. She took the neder before she was married, and therefore the Baal, when he marries her, even though the chalos neder has not validated the neder yet, he cannot be made for the neder, because as we said before, the critical moment is the moment of her neder, which was before she was married to him. And now we start the Mishnah, we start the daf for today, which is the hemshech of this Mishnah Pei Tes. Nodra v'hi b'rshus habal. This is the flip side. While she was married, she took a neder. And you would think that therefore the Baal could be made for law. And that's indeed the halach of the Mishnah, made for law, Ketzad. What's the chiddush here? Amra hareini nazira liachar shloshim yom. She took the neder while she was married, but although she enunciated the haflas neder, the neder would not be chal. And in fact, afal pishin is amro and esgarsha b'toch shloshim yom. Her husband is no longer alive, or no longer a husband because he divorced her before the chalos neder, 30 days down the line. And the chiddush is harei mufa, that even though he was made for the neder before the neder would be chal, but as we said before, the ikar, the kovea, is the shas neder. And since he was her husband at the shas neder, that neder lends itself, by definition, to hafaras habal. So that hafaras habal in this case predates the chalos haneder. And as we'll soon see, this is a subject of controversy. But the Mishnah's opinion here is that he can be made for the neder. Now the Mishnah is going to quote a case where he cannot be made for the neder, even though she was married to him both b'shas haneder and b'shas hafaras haneder. Nodra bo bayom, that is garsha bo bayom, v'chzira bo bayom. So on the very day that he married her, she took a neder, and on that very day, she was divorced, and he married her, remarried her, all on the same day. It's amazing. Married her, divorced her, remarried her, all on the same day. Einu yochel lahafer. even though when she took the neder, he could have been made for the neder, because at that time they were married. But once she was divorced from him, that ishus is gone. It's history. And so that his status as the married partner of this woman is no longer relevant. And when he remarries her, he starts a whole new slate. And that neder that she took while he was married to the first time around is called the kodman. And ain't a Baal Mefer b'kodman. A Baal can't be made for a neder if the neder was taken before she was married. Now the Mishnah concludes with Zeh Klal, Kol sheyotza l'shus atzmo shoachas eino yochel lahafik. Once there was a hafkas ha'ishus, even for a minute, with the gerushin, he loses his rights to any nedarim that she took to be made for those nedarim, even though he remarries her. And even if he remarries her on the very same day that she took the neder. The Gemara now quotes a machlokes tanoim on the very subject and thesis of our Mishnah. Because in a case where she took the neder at a certain shah, but the chalos neder was postponed for a later period of time. Tanya, we learned in the Brisa, Almona ugrusha sha'amra hareini nazir l'chshech enosei v'niseis is Rabbi Yishmael Omer Yofer. He can be made for the neder that she took before the nesuah. Now, normally, if he's not married to her, then her nedarim do not lend themselves to hafar sabal. But here, the chalos haneder was after the marriage. So the fact that the Maisa Haflah took place before the marriage, according to Rabbi Shmuel, is not relevant. What's relevant is the Shas Hafara. The Shas Chalos HaNeder will determine the Hafara. And here she was Tachtov, she was already B'Shuso at the time of the Chalos HaNeder. Therefore, Rabbi Shmuel maintains he can be made for them. Rabbi Akiva Omer Lo Yofer. Rabbi Akiva holds that the critical moment that determines whether the Baal has the ability, the authority to be made for the neder is the Shas Haflah, the moment that she took the neder. Here she took the neder before she was in his rishus before the marriage, even though the Chalos HaNeder later on would be after the marriage. Nevertheless, Rabbi Akiva holds it's not the Chalos HaNeder that determines, but rather the Maisa HaNeder. The simona, if you need a memory device, Yalali. So these are Roshei Tevos, Yofer, Lo Yofer, Lo Yofer, Yofer. And it works like this. If she took a neder, that would be Chal Lichshei Nase, then according to Rabbi Shmuel, that's going to be the Yud of Yofer. And then, in that very same case, where the Chalos HaNeder was after the Nesuah, but the Maisa Neder took place before the Nesuah, Rabbi Akiva would say the Lamed of Yud Lamed Lo Yofer. Now we have a case where a woman who's married takes a Neder that should be only Chal after the Gerushin, and now we have Rabbi Shmuel again first, Lo Yofer, and then Rabbi Akiva would hold Yofer. That's the Lamed Yud of the Yalili. And the reason for Rabbi Akiva's Shita is because in this case, since she took the neder while she was married, Rabbi Akiva holds that the Shas HaNeder is Koveh. Now, I get the impression from this Simon that Rabbi Yishmael comes before Rabbi Akiva. And he quotes here a kasha l'chora ein ze siman muva kevan she im adam yitav yishanis divrei Rabbi Akiva kodem then shuv lo yola siman. He might think that the beginning, let's say the first yud and the second lamed, would be Rabbi Akiva, which is the exact opposite. So he quotes a Kesef Mishnah in Hilchos Kelim, who says that Rabbi Yishmael was the Rebbe of Rabbi Akiva. Eishes ish sha'amra reading Nazir l'ches garesh v'nizkarsha. So she took a neder while she was married, but the neder will be chal after she's divorced. Rabbi Yishmael Omer, and now we go with Rabbi Yishmael l'shitaso, that everything depends upon the shas chalos haneder. And the neder was pushed off until after the gerushin, and is therefore lo yefer. Rabbi Akiva Omer yofer, because Rabbi Akiva holds that the shas haneder is kovas, and in this case she was tachtov when she took the neder. Rabbi Yishmael. Rabbi Yishmael says, I have a raya from a pasuk that everything depends on the shas chalos. And how is that so? Hareu Omer, the pasuk regarding the almana and the grusha who took a neder and then she got married, says the following: the neder almana grusha, and then it says yokum oleh. So when the Torah says neder, it's talking about a neder that's chal. Usually when the Torah says neder stam, it doesn't refer to the ma'aser neder, but the neder itself, the iser itself. And the Torah is saying that when can this neder be subject to hafara? That's adshe neder b'shas almonus ugrusha, that the chalos haneder should overlap with the time of Nisuin. So therefore, if the kiyum chalos haneder is during the time of almonus ugrusha, when she's already out of the rishus of the Baal, then the neder doesn't lend itself to hafaras habal. But if the chalos haneder is postponed until she gets remarried, then even though she was makabel the neder after she was an almona or grusha, nevertheless it lends itself to hafara. Rabbi Akiva Savar, Rabbi Akiva rejects this reading, this interpretation of the pasuk, and he says, let's read the end of the pasuk. That's going to prove my sheet. It says, Rabbi Omer in the pasuk, it says, Kol asher osra al nafsha. We're talking about the maisa of the neder. We're not talking about the neder itself, but osra. Osra is a verb, an active verb that describes the actual kabbalah sa'isa, the actual maisa flaw. Ad shehei isuri neder b'shas almonus begerush. So isuri neder here means kabbalah's isuri neder. So if the kabbalah was at a time when she was married, then the Baal could be made for the neder. But if it was at a time when the Baal was not a bar hafara, he didn't have within his control the ability to be made for the neder, then that neder, which is the maisa hafara of kabbalah's isur neder, does not lend itself to hafara. So if she was Nadra Ba'od, she had Nisua, even though the Chalos HaNeder was after Gerushin, he could be made for it, because everything depends upon the Shas HaNeder. Omer Rav Chizda, Mas Nisan, Rabbi Akiva. Rav Chizda wants to analyze our Mishnah and conclude that our Mishnah reflects the Shita of Rabbi Akiva, that everything depends upon the Shas HaNeder. The Mishnah had said that an almana or a grusha who declared already Nazir le'achar shloshim yom, she got married within the shloshim yom, the Baal cannot be made for Nedarim. And in the opposite case, if she was an Eshes Ish who said Hareini Nazira le'achar shloshim yom, the Baal could be made for Nedarim, right, during the time of the marriage, even though the neder would be chal after the gerushin at the end of the 30-day period. And that Mishnah therefore reflects the shita of Akiva that everything depends upon Shas HaNeder, Shas Hamiras HaNeder. Abai rejects this. Abai Omar Afilu Tema Rabbi Yishmael. You can interpret the Mishnah even according to Rabbi Yishmael, everything depends upon the Shas Chalos HaNeder. But nevertheless, there's a fundamental difference between the cases that the Mishnah is addressing and the cases that we spoke about in the Brisa. Masnisin, Talia, Nafsha, Yomi. The cases in our Mishnah where she accepted upon herself that the Chalos HaNeder, its time period should be dependent on Yomi. So she was Nesua, and she said, Arei Nizira liachar shloshim yom, and Sholmu Yome v'lo nisgarsha. If we got to the 30 days, at the end of the 30 days, and she was still married, he didn't give her a divorce, so she's still in his reshus. And if she declares, Almona or Grusha declares, Hareini Nazir Lachar Shloshim Yom, and Sholmu Yomi Velomis Nasle, if the 30-day period passed by and she didn't get married, so it means that between the time of the neder and the time of the chalos neder, nothing changed. And therefore, even Rabbi Shmuel would say and concede that in this case, we look at the Zman Amiras HaNeder. The only time that Rabbi Shmuel puts the emphasis on Shas Chalos HaNeder is when there's a discrepancy between the Shas Amiras HaNeder and the Shas Chalos HaNeder. But here's a case of Shomu Yomi Velomis Nasla, that even after the 30-day period passed, she was not remarried. And therefore, if the situation is identical from the time that she took the neder until the time the neder is chal, even Rabbi Shmuel would be modeh that everything depends on the Shas Hamiras HaNeder. The Bryce, on the other hand, which is the real chidush of the Shita presentation of the breakthrough Shita of Rabbi Shmuel, that's Talia Nafsha B'Nesuah, where she was Mekabel Salah, she accepted upon herself a chalos neder that would depend upon her marriage situation. She said, as an Almona Grusha, I'm an Azira L'She and Yosef. When I'll be married, I'll be a Nazira. And in that case, she postponed the chalos Nazirs till after the marriage. And here's what Rabbi Shmuel says, there's a fundamental difference between Shas HaNeder and Shas Chalos HaNeder. The Shas Neder was before she was Brishon, so the Shas Chalos HaNeder was afterwards. And therefore, everything depends upon Shas Chalos HaNeder, and the Baal could be Mefer. Or in the flip case, she was Nesua, and she said, Arei Nazir Lichsha as Garish, that the Naziris was postponed the Chalos till after Gerushin. So therefore, we know from the beginning, from the get-go, that she will not be in a situation of marriage at the time of the Chalos HaNeder, and that's what Rabbi Shmuel would say, that he cannot be made for the neder because the Ikar is the Shas Chalos HaNeder. Now, at the end of our Mishnah, there was a Zeh HaKlal. So the Mishnah had established that if she was married when she took the neder and then she was divorced from her husband, and he remarried her on the same day, he cannot be made for her Nedarim because the Gerushin completely uproots the Nesuin. So she took the neder during the Nesuin, but that Nesuin is gone. And then the Mishnah adds Zeh HaKlal, that Kol Sheyotza Liachar Shenodru L'Shus Ha'atzmo Shel Achas Eino Yochel. Once the Ishus was terminated, even for 1 hour, he cannot be made for her Nedarim. Now, back on Daf Ayin Aleph, with regard to a Nara Murasa who took a neder after Erisin, and then she was divorced, and then she was remarried again in Erisin, then it says that Avia Ubaila Ha'achron Mefir Nidarel. And there the Mishnah concluded on Daf Ayin Aleph Zeh Klal, Kol Shelo Yatza Liachar Shenodru Shus Atz Mashachas, Avia Ubaila Achron Mefir Nidarel. So now the Gemara comes to analyze the Zeh Klal in those two Mishnayos. Zeh Klal the Toni Gami Naira Maros, the earlier Mishnah in the on Daf Ayin Aleph and Perek Naira Marosa, that Kol Shelo Yotzel Rishus Atz Mashachas Avia Baila Ha'achron Mefir Nidarel Lasuye. What does it come? Every Zeh Klal comes to include something. And that's a case of lo yotzel shus atzma, because she never had nisuin, she never entered into chuppah. She was always in a state of erusin. So she had erusin, gerushin, and another erusin, and therefore the Baal Achron, together with the father, could be made for her nedarim. She's a nara. Lasuye. What's the chiddush here? Halach. Ha'av im shlucha balo, shalosh shlucha av im shlucha bal, v'nara v'rosa via bailo mefir nidarel. What happens here is that there was never a nesuin. Why was there never a nesuin? Because the shluchei av accompanied the shluchei bal. The nesuin only is clinched when the shluchei av hand over the nara to the shluchei baal, and they check out. They're on their way back to the father. Or if, let's say, the shluchei av accompany the shluchei baal, so in such a case, it's not considered a chuppah and a nesud. She never left the rishus of her orus and entered into her own rishus, and therefore, avio baila mefir nidareh. But Zeh Klal Toni Hacha, here in our Mishnah, the Zeh Klal, in the Perek Elu Nedarim, and here the Mishnah says, Kol sheyotzel rishus atz mashachas eino yochel lahafer lasuye. That's also a ribui of masal shluchei baal, where the father does not accompany the shluchei baal, and the shluchim of the father did not accompany the shluchei baal. And in such a case, there's full-fledged nisuin, and that's considered chuppah. She leaves the rishus of her father, and therefore the father cannot be made for once she left his rishus. The Baal can't be made for a different reason, and that's because she took the neder before the nisuin, and that's ain't a Baal made for bikos. Now, the Mishnah that we're about to learn now, on the bottom of Daf Peites, is a hemshech of the Mishnah on Daf Samach V'Hamam in Beis, that a Nara Murasa, there's a shutfis, a partnership between her father and her Baal, that together, as a joint effort, they can be made for her nedarim. However, there are three scenarios, three categories in which the father loses his rights to be made for his daughter's nedarim. Number one is Kisha Bogra. He only has rights to be made for his daughter's nedarim when she's a Nara, but not as a Bogeres. Number two, she leaves, obviously, the rishus of her father after his Misa. And number three, she leaves the father's rishus after Nisuin. She's no longer in his rishus, even if he's alive and well, even though even though she's still a Nara. So again, it's either she's no longer a Nara, or her father's gone, or she had Nisuin. Now, the Mishnah, which the Gemara is going to attribute to Rabbi Yehuda, decides to go into all the nitty-gritty details. Instead of just making it to three categories, like we mentioned before, Bagrus, Misa Sa'ad, or Nisuin, instead the Mishnah gives you every single possible scenario and comes up with the number Tesha Naras. there are 9 narrows where there's no possibility of hafar, and therefore Nedarim kayom. So we're going to go through the 9 cases, and then you'll see that the Chachamim actually reduced it to 3 categories. But for some reason, Rabbi Yehuda wanted to give you every possible combination, every scenario. So number 1, we'll try to count to 9, is that Bogeres, she took the neder when she was already a Bogeres. And Vehi is Soma. And not only that, she is already a Nesua. And that's called Yisoma B'chaya Av, that even though the father's alive, it's as if she's Yisoma in the sense that there's no possibility for the father to be made for a Nedarim. So we have a combination now of Bagrus and Nesua. Now, afterwards, she became an almana or a grusha. And once she was in Nesua, she left the rishus of the father irreversibly, even if she's a ketana. And once hufka rishus ha'av lahafer, that's it. He can no longer be made for an nedarim, even after she gets divorced. Number 1, because she was a bogeres, and number 2, because she was in Nesua. Scenario number 2, and by the way, it seems like the Mishnah goes minakal lachamur. In other words, there are 2 reasons, 2 strikes against the Av in the first case. However, in the second case, Nara, when she took the neder, she was a Nara. So we don't have that strike against her that she took the neder as a Bogeres. But Bagra, now she's already a Bogeres. So she had taken the neder as a Nara, and now she's a Bogeres. Does the father have the ability to be made for his Har Nedarim, which she took as a Nara? But the answer is that he is so much. She's already married. And we said before that once she's married, even though she gets divorced, she has left in a permanent way the rishus of her father. So if the father hears about the neder now, she still, I shouldn't say she's still now, but I mean to say she took the neder when the father had rishus over the neder, meaning the Eis Na'arusa. Nevertheless, once she became a Nesua, that's it. Paka Zchus Hafar Shalabah. So once again, we have a double whammy over here. We have Bagra, and we have Yisov V'chayama, meaning Nises. So the 2 reasons why she has already been mafkia the Rishus Ha'av, but the Chiddush of the second case is that even though when she took the neder, she was in the Rishus of the Av. So now we're on Daf Pei Tesam and Beis, and amongst the 9 cases where the father cannot be made for his Har Nedarim, we're up to case number 3. Nara Shalo Bagra, he is Soma. Now, this case number 3 is awfully similar to case number 2. The only difference is that here the Nesuin took place while she was a Nara. So not only was the Neder while she was a Nara, but the Nesuin took place while she was a Nara. So in this case, the reason why the Av cannot be made for an Nedarim is only one-sided. It's monolithic. It's only because of the Nesuin, meaning she's the Yisom B'chayavir once she gets married with Nesuin, even though she's still a Nara. Case number 4, Bogeres Umesavir. She took the neder, she was already Bogeres, and then her father died. Again, we have 2 strikes against it. Number 1, she's a Bogeres when she took the neder. She's already out of the realm of the father. Number 2, he's dead. Again, you wonder why the Mishnah had to tell me these obvious chidushim here. There are no chidushim whatsoever. But Rabbi Yehuda wants to cover every possible scenario. Nara, she took the neder when she was in Nara. Then she became Bogeres Umesavia. Again, there are two strikes against her, against the father, sorry. Number one, that she took the neder when she was a Bogeres. She was already out of the Rishus of the father. Number two, he died. So once again, there's no Chiddush over here, but the only difference is that this case, where the two strikes are on Misa and Yisov V'chayavia Nisuin, she had taken the neder when she was at Nara and in the Rishus of the father. Case number 6, Nara Shalom Bogra Umesavia. So here's a case where she did not leave the Rishus of her father, meaning she's a Nara. Number 2, she's not a Nesua. She's still an unmarried woman. But Mesa'ah. So Misa Sa'ah is enough to obviously make it impossible for him to be made for it. Nara, number 7, Shemei Savia. Okay, after her father died, she took the neder, Shemei Savia Bogra. So now, not only is her father dead, but she's also Bogeres. So that neder doesn't lend itself to Hafara for 2 reasons. First of all, the father died, and secondly, she's already Bogeres. Case number 8, Bogeres, the Avia Kayom. So just the regular case of Bogeres. In other words, she took a neder as a Bogeres. Or in the next case, number 9, she took the neder as a Nara. And then her father, she became a Bogeres, and her father's still alive. So if she took neder as Bogeres, so when the neder was taken, she was already out of the Rishus. And if she took the neder as a Nara, but now she's Bogeres, then she's out of the Rishus of the father. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, and this is why we assume that the entire Mishnah goes according to Rabbi Yehuda, Af hamasi bito kitana kitana, and his armala on his garsha, v'chozra etzlo, adayini nara. Here's another case where the father cannot be mefer. He married her off as a kitana, and then her husband died or divorced her. She went back to live with her father, and Adayin he nara. And nevertheless, once there was Nesuin, she left the Rishus of her father irreversibly, and she can never go back to the Rishus of the father as far as her first Nedarim. The Gemara says, "Am Rabbi Yehuda Marav, Divrei Zog Divrei Rabbi Yehuda." It was Rabbi Yehuda who wanted to give every possible scenario. He came up with 9 reasons why the father can't be made. There are 3 categories of situations in which the father cannot be made for. Number 1, Bogeres. Number 2, Yisoma, which means she had Nesuin. And number 3, Yisoma means that her father died. And number 3, Yisoma B'chayav, meaning that she had Nesuin. And this leads us to the Mishnah on Daf Peites on the base, the second Mishnah on Peites on the base. Konam sheini nene li'aba ulavicha im osa ani al picha. We have situations in which a neder was taken al atnai. And the question is, can the hafara process be active and operative even before the chalos neder, because the tanai was not yet makuyo? So she took a neder enjoining herself from Hana, from her father and her father-in-law, but on the condition, if I will give you my husband, Hana, then I will be enjoined from Hana from both my father and your father. Now the Mishnah gives the opposite scenario. If I benefit from my father or your father, then I take upon myself that I won't any nenes lecha. That if she will go ahead and be mahana and give hana to his father or her father, meaning father-in-law, or her father, then she will be enjoined from benefiting from her husband. And in both these cases, Harei Ze Yofer, the Baal can be made for her Nedarim, because our Mishnah here reflects the sheet of the Chachamim, who maintain that there's hafara even before the chalos haneder. That's how the Ran interprets this Mishnah. So again, the chalos haneder, which is in the Reisha, after she is mahana oscha, and that's the kiyum tonight, or the chalos haneder in the Sefer is after she gets hana from the father, or she gives hana, I should say, to the father or to her father-in-law. If the neder was mufar al yidei baila before the kiyum tonight, the hafara is valid. Now we're not sure exactly why the Baal could be made for these Nedarim. And maybe we can differentiate between the Reisha and the Sefer. In the Reisha, the Tanai was im osani al picha. So she's only prohibiting Abba and Avicha. So then we get into the whole issue of what's called inui nefesh. Right, she may sometimes need her father or her father. In the Sefer, Sheni Nenes L'cha, that if she'll give Hanot to his father, she will be also to benefit from her husband. So that should also clearly be Inui Nefesh. No, I'm sorry. In the Sefer, it's not really clearly Inui Nefesh, because we're talking about Any Nenes L'cha, right? So she won't get benefit from her Baal. Yeah, that should also be Inui Nefesh. Great, let's take the first case where Im Tahana as Baila, then she's Asura Lehenos Miavio Michama, according to the Ran. This is Varm Shebeino Leveina. Why isn't this Inui Nefesh? One second. Oh, Baruch Hashem. The Chassam Sofer asks my kasha. Isha Oseres al Atzma Lehenos Miodam Ploni. Shmuel says on Daf Pei Beis, that's called Inui Nefesh. That's only according to Chachamim. Rabbi Yossi holds that's not called Inui Nefesh, but rather it's called Dvarim Shebeino Leveino. You may remember that Rabbi Yossi was the Bar Plukta of the Chacham. He had a much more narrow definition of the scope of Inui Nefesh. But nevertheless, it comes under Dvarim Shebeino Leveino. The Gemara says, Tanya, we learned in the Brisa, a woman says to her husband, She'eni nenes li Abba ulavicha, right, which means that she enjoys herself from getting anah from the father or the father-in-law. Imani osa leficha, if I'll give you hana. So the neder is not chal until she gives hana. And here the Brisa records a machlokas tanan. Rabbi Nosson Omer lo yofen. Since the neder was not chal, because it was never there was not yet a kiyum tonight. There's no hafara on a neder that's not chal. Right? We said that the chacham shita was that there's hafaras nedarim even before the neder is chal. Now the Mishnah Now the Brisa gives a second scenario with the same identical machlokes between Rabbi Nassan and the Rabbanan. And Amir Hashem will have a long discussion here in the Ran why the Brisa has to give a second scenario. Netula nimena Yehudim im mishamashtem. I will be prohibited to have any intimacy with any member of Klal Yisrael if I will have an intimacy with you, with my husband. So her Tanai was that if she'll be Meshamish in Baila, then the Isur Lehenos from Kol Yisrael, from Tashmish to Kol Yisrael would be Chal. And that Isur includes her husband. So Rabbi Nosson Omer Lo Yofer. Why? Because she didn't yet have an intimacy with her husband, and therefore she didn't fulfill the Tanai. The Neder is not yet Chal, and there's no Afar according to Rabbi Nosson until the Neder is Chal. Chacham Yofer. Because the sheet of the Chacham is that a Baal could be made for instance, the Nidrei Ishto even before the Chalos HaNeder. And here the Ran says that the Brisa needs two cases. One, the Reish is going to be a Chiddush according to the Chachamim, and the Sefer is going to be a Chiddush according to Rabbi Nosson. Well, let's see if we can go through this. In the first case, that she took a neder that she wouldn't have hana from her father or her father-in-law if she'll have tashmish with her husband. So here's a chiddush according to Chachamim. Why? Her neder is called eating nefesh. Okay, then? The fact that she won't be able to get any anor from her father or father-in-law, that's inu nefesh. The Tanai, on the other hand, is not called inu nefesh. Why? Because she's saying that she won't have hanos tashmish from her husband. That's dvarim shebeino leveino. And yet, the chiddush of the Brisa here is that even though the Tanai and the Neder are on two different realms, the Neder itself is Inui, the Tanai is Varsh Beino Leveina. Even in this case, where there's no equation or identity between the Neder and the Tanai, nevertheless, the Chacham recognize the rights of the father to be made from the neder even before the chalos haned. And in the sefer, the chiddush is going to be according to Rabbi Nosson, because in the sefer, both the Tanai and the neder are dvarim shebeino leveino. Because Netula Nimene Yehudim is not considered inu nefesh. It's only dvarim shebeino leveino. And in the Sefer, we're talking about where she takes an edit that if the Tanai is Mekuyim with regard to her father-in-law, she won't have hano from her husband. That's called Dvarim Shebeino Leveino. So Zahav means that even Rabbi Nosson would concede that we're going to consider it as if the Chalos HaNeder was Chal B'Fal, because there's a complete identity and analogy between the Tanai and the Neder itself. They're both Dvarim Shebeino Leveino. Hahu Gavra the Itzar Hanuyosel the Alma Le, he prohibited himself with the Neder to be Neder from anybody. He nosiv Isis, or if he'll go ahead and marry this woman, Kilo before Hanina Hilka, so before I learn halacha. Now, what does this mean? He's obviously trying to motivate himself to learn Torah. But what does it mean to learn halacha? And here we have three interpretations in the Rishon. The Rosh learns when he says in Yisa Isha Kodem Shilman halachos, and it's any number of halachas. Tosfos learns Acha Elmod Kol Hashat, and the Shita Getzes says that it means halacha sedura, the Mishnah sedura. Right, the gap of it tovlaya below imtse lemisna. Unfortunately, he started running after his makil, his tarmil. In other words, he was very involved in his work. And lo also biyado, he didn't get a chance to study Torah. So again, even though he tried with all his might, running around to try to learn Torah, but nevertheless, lo ola dora biyado. And now at this point, he can't get married. Why? Because he made a neder that he won't be nene from the entire world if he gets married and he hasn't learned any halacha. So if he would go ahead and get married, then he would be also not know the entire world. And certainly he would not be able to get married. Now, if we go according to Rabbi Nassan, then the only opportunity we'd have here to get married would be if we went to a chacham to be matir the neder, because according to Rabbi Nassan, he himself, the father himself, cannot be matir the neder. No, I'm sorry. Just paket. According to Rabbi Nassan, there's no possibility of being matir the neder because the neder is not chal. So what happened in this case? Also, Rav Achabar Afuni tricked him, the Shabshet. And he said to him, even if you'll get married, your neder of prohibiting hanoah from the world will not be chal. That's not true. He fooled him. The insvei issasar. So based on that, he got married, and there was a kiyama tanai, and now the chalos isur should be chal, prohibiting him from all the brios, and he wrote Dafsadi, the Sharkei Tina. So what did Rav Acha do? He tried to demonstrate that this person needs other people. He can't remain in a situation of an Isur Neder where he won't have Hanoah. He can't be Robinson Crusoe. And what he did was he threw, Rav Acha threw like dirt or cement onto this guy's beged, and now he needs a cleaner to clean his beged. The Isil coming to Rav Chizda, and then he realized that he has to be matir the neder, and Rav Chizda was matir the neder. Omar Rava man chakim lemevet ki hay milsa. He loved the Rav Acha bar Rav Huna the Gaber Rabbi. Only a chacham as great as Rav Acha could be smart enough to come up with this eitzah and this need to fool him, because Rav Acha holds the pligi rabbanu Rabbi Nosson b'Farach and Avi pligi b'she'ela. The issue of whether or not a Baal could be made for the Nedarim of his wife before the Chal, meaning before they came at Tanai, is an issue that divides them even with regard to Sheilas Chacham. So therefore, if you go with Rabbi Nosson, so not only is the Baal non-able, sorry for the double negative, to be made for these Nedarim because the Tanai has not yet been Mekuyah, but even a Chacham cannot be matir the Neder before it's Chal. So therefore, Rav Acha wanted the Neder to be Chal, and therefore he pushed him to get married. He hit so he fooled him. And now that the Neder is Chal, even according to Rabbi Nosson, he could be shoal on the neder and remove the Isur of Hanoah Brios. And what's going to motivate him to be shoal on the neder? The fact that he's got a dirty cloak and he needs desperately to go to the laundromat. And then the Chacham could be matir the neder. Now we're going to continue B'li Neder in this machlokas between Rabbi Nosson and Rabbanon tomorrow. But this is where we're going to stop here on the top of Daf Sadi Yom Al. Wishing you a good day and a happy Erev Rosh Chodesh.